Hi, it's Megan from Tween Book Reviews here again, ready to do another video interview. Today I'll be interviewing Annette Laing, author of the Snipesville Chronicles. In the Snipesville Chronicles, three kids are thrown into the past against their will to try and fix mistakes in history. Okay, so what books did you enjoy, as a kid?
Well, I was a kid a very, very long time ago in another world, in England. So probably the books that I do remember you will never have heard of, like Nina Borden's Carrie's War and Grimble by Clement Freud. But mostly I have to tell you, Megan, that I was a complete dork. Okay, that's what we would say now. And I really I like nonfiction. I like history. I like biographies. So, specific titles now completely elude me, but that was my big thing when I was about your age.
Cool. Are there any, fiction or nonfiction books you read specifically because you were writing the Snipesville Chronicles?
I really avoided fiction. I have a dear friend who's also an historian who kept trying to get me to read The Time Traveler's Wife. And my great terror was that I was going to wind up ripping it off. So I've never read The Magic Treehouse. I've never read Time Warp Trio. I've never read the obvious ones that have some kind of relationship, the same sort of genre with my books. So to write the history, first and foremost, I relied on my memory of the history of the period in England, which I'm really excited about. World War II England, the home front, it's something that fascinates me and always has. And then when I was sort of done with the first draft, then I went back and checked the history to make sure I hadn't got anything wrong. And not just sort of the facts and the dates, and because there's very little of that in my books, practically none, but rather just the feel of the period. So pretty much at that point I started rereading the social and cultural history of the period, reading some newspapers from the time, some diaries, and just trying to, make sure that I wasn't screwing it up completely, because if I had, there are people who lived through that period who are still with us. And believe me, they would tell me, starting with my 93-year-old grandmother. So I had to get it right.
What books do you like to read now in your free time?
I have really Catholic tastes. In other words, I read very widely, and I read very sort of serious history books. Although my favorite one of those most recently actually got great reviews as a really readable book for the general public, and that's Julie Flavel's When London Was the Capital of America, which is about Americans in London in the 1700s, and it's an awesome book. So I do like to read. I still like to read history. I do like some historical fiction. I hate bad historical fiction, romance novels. I don't do those. Okay, but I do like Pat Barker, who's very well known in England, and I like trash. I absolutely love the Shopaholic series. Sorry, it's not really trash, but it's not exactly high literature either. So what I pick up, I think I read most recently a biography of the English poet Philip Larkin, which was really light reading. It's about that thick, So I read that, and I started on a mystery novel that a friend of mine wrote, and I'm embarrassed to say I haven't finished it yet. So I'm not going to say what it is, because then it looks like it's not a good book, and it's actually just I'm lazy. So yeah, just all kinds of things, ketchup labels, whatever's handy.
How much research did you do, before you started writing, and then while you started writing?
Well, like I said, I mean, most of the research for the first book, Don't Know Where, Don't Know When, I did while I was writing, just to be quite sure. I looked at pictures in describing Balesworth, which is the English town that these three American kids find themselves in. I kind of made up Balesworth, but it's kind of also based on Stevenage, which is the town I grew up in England. So I looked at pictures from not only Stevenage, but other parts of the county of Hertfordshire and other places in 1940. I read, like I said, primary sources, original documents, as well as books on the period. For the second book, it was a little trickier, because book 2 is set in 1851, and that's a period I'm fond of, but I hadn't really thought about for a very, very long time. And I just thought, oh, 1851, I think I'll set something there, because I love the Great Exhibition, which was the First World's Fair. And I really wanted to incorporate that into the book. I wanted to talk about child labor, which is still an issue with children being exploited all over the world.
Right.
And so I wanted to sort of work that in, which meant going back to my Victorians. So I actually did a fair amount of research. I didn't have a lot of time to spend in Scotland doing research, but I spent a day in the archives of the City Library in Dundee, Scotland. And Dundee plays quite a large role in the second book, A Different Day, A Different Destiny. So what I did was I just said to the librarians, I haven't called ahead, I've broken all the rules. You know, I'm a professional historian by trade. I know I'm not supposed to do this, but here I am. Can you bring me everything you have from 1851? And they did. They brought me the census records, they brought me the newspapers, and, you know, you get to this point after 20 years of doing historical research, you kind of know what you're looking for, and particularly for fiction, I don't need to have everything scrupulously documented, so I could really move through that stuff. And I had this huge pile, and I got through it in a day. I've never had such a productive day in an archive in my life for any project. So that was truly awesome. And it was basically out of that I was able to get, okay, here's where my character Hannah, you remember in the book that she has to live with this family. I based the family on my great-grandmother's sisters and her mother, who I never met, except for one of her sisters. I knew my great-grandmother, I knew one of her sisters. The rest just kind of came down through family legend. So I partly based that family on them, but then I kind of moved them from the time they actually lived, which was late 19th, early 20th century. I moved them back to 1851, so I had to sort of make them fit the period. And then the place I put them in was an area of central Dundee that's actually been demolished. Most of Dundee was knocked down in the 60s, part of, you know, trying to make the city look better, and in fact they made it look horrible. So all these beautiful old buildings and these slums that had been knocked down, I was able to sort of bring back to life in the book, which was, you know, kind of fun. It makes you feel all powerful when you can do things like that. Yeah.
How did you get the idea for the kids to travel into the past?
Well, you know, it's an interesting question. It might seem kind of an obvious thing. I started out as a professional historian, and until 3 years ago, I was a college professor, tenure, everything. And I had got tenure, I don't remember, about 2003. And that's the point where they say, okay, we're not going to fire you, but you're stuck here forever. Which is sort of a mixed blessing. You know, on the one hand, it's like, oh, I have a job. On the other hand, oh, God, I'm in South Georgia for the rest of my life at this university, and I don't particularly like this university. So I was having a midlife crisis. You know, I don't want to say how old I was because I can't remember, but, you know, about 40. And I thought, I'd like to do this. I've been watching these reality shows on TV, like the 1900 House and the 1940s House that PBS was doing a few years ago, and in which people pretended to time travel. And I thought, oh, that'd be so cool to do. I would love to do that. Oh, how can I find an excuse to do that? I know, I'll do it for kids. Now, I had one small son, and no clue if I wanted to work with children. I actually thought I probably didn't. But it was completely self-indulgent. So I thought, well, I want to do this, and I guess I have to have kids along. That was kind of my philosophy. So we kind of recreated England in 1940 in the university's conference center, and each room represented a different aspects of a child's life, whether it was school or home or shopping or movie theater or whatever. We even had an aid. And then we invited kids to have this experience where they spent half an hour in each room and pretended to be English kids. And it was a total blast. I had my students working on it, my college students, playing the roles in costume and leading the children around, and everybody had an awesome time. So I called it Time Shop, and I did that until 2006. And wound up with a $22,000 a year budget, which was kind of amazing for 2 one-day programs. And it kind of came out of that. I started thinking, it's a very long-winded answer, I'm sorry. I started thinking just, whoa, now, okay, supposing that were really real. And I kept thinking of like three kids who really travel in time to England in World War II. And how would that be for American kids from the 21st century to come face to face with this, by now, completely alien world? I mean, when I was a kid, World War II England didn't seem that long ago. Now it seems like, I mean, it is literally another century, and it feels like it. Which I hope answers your question.
Yeah. Do you base any characters off people you might meet in real life?
Oh, I could get seriously sued if I said yes. So I'm going to say yes. Well, I can explain that. I try to. In the first book, I wanted so much to write a little tribute to a dear friend of mine in London, who is an amazing person. She's an art collector, and she is an art consultant, advises rich people how to spend their money on paintings and whatnot. And she's a lovely, lovely person, and she likes gardens, and she's passionate about so many things, and she's great with children. And so I thought, well, it'd be lovely to base a character on her. And then as I wrote, this character became unrecognizable, and I had to go back and rewrite, because she was no longer this rather sort of slightly ditzy but very clever and delightful and sweet. She was this scary woman, just frightening to children, but yet lovely. Of course, she became, as you've probably guessed, Mrs. Devonish. And so where did she come from? I did not know until I had finished the first draft, and a friend actually asked me that question. And I said, oh, there's loads of women like that in England in 1940. You've got to be kidding me. It's an archetype. That is, there's lots of women. And then suddenly I felt like I had been punched in the gut. And I burst into tears, which is not a typical reaction I tend to have to things, not at my age. And that's when I realized who it was. And it was one of my old teachers from England, who I hadn't seen in a quarter century. And long story short, I ended up not only looking her up, discovering she was still alive and living in her own home, and in her 80s, but I actually flew to London to see her. Because I was just like, you are not going to believe this. You are so not going to believe this. And of course, I'm coming back after 25 years, and it's still not clear to me she entirely remembered who I was. But it was not intentional. And, I find that happens a lot. I set out to write about one person thinking, oh my goodness, this person is great material for a book. And I wind up writing about somebody else entirely. And sometimes it takes another person, a friend who's read the book, who knows that person, who recognizes that person, to tell me who it was that I wrote about, at which point usually the lights go on and I realize they're absolutely right.